Hello and welcome to Lost Love Chronicles.
Kathy stared at the well-dressed man standing in front of her, his words still echoing in her mind. "Kathy Brown, you've been served," he'd said with a little sadness. The people in the office had grown deathly quiet, and for a moment Kathy thought time might have stood still. In her hand was the death warrant for her 5-year marriage. With a small sob, she slumped into a chair clutching the paper. Slowly, the office began to come to life. The stares, the whispers, and all the disapproving looks started to build. Suddenly, Kathy heard her friend's soft voice beside her. "Kathy, come on," Kit said gently as she took her friend by the arm and stood her to her feet. "Let's get you into a conference room and out of the spotlight." The raven-haired 30-something woman guided her friend away from the gawking stares of their fellow office workers. Those who had witnessed the show noted how Kathy had gone from a loud, flirty, fun-loving blonde to a beaten woman in just minutes. A few saw humor in the irony, others pity. Most already suspected the reason behind the divorce papers. "How? I don't understand," Kathy stammered. Things had just started changing for the better. She clutched herself, as if her hug would give her more strength. Kit slid her arm around her, trying to comfort her friend. "I don't know, girl," Kit said gently. "Did Eric say anything? Any clue this was coming?" "Just the opposite," she managed to say between gasps. "It was like we were newlyweds again. I figured he was making up for all the wasted time he'd spent overseas." Kit flinched only slightly, but Kathy noticed it. Kathy replayed the last 4 months of her marriage in her mind. Since Eric came home from Afghanistan, their sex life had been incredible. It was even better than after he had returned from Iraq 2.5 years ago. He had been so passionate and physical. "Oh God," she thought to herself, "most times I can barely walk afterwards." She smiled sadly as she wiped a remaining tear from her eye. "It's been so hot and exciting. I mean, after I got back from that business trip last week." Kathy's smile warmed a little. "Oh my God, Kit, Eric just wore me out. We did it so much that I ended up begging him to stop." Kathy's smile disappeared when she looked at her friend's questioning face. "No, nothing happened when I was on that trip. I told you it was over," she retorted. Kit nodded, but wasn't smiling. In a calm voice she asked, "When was the last time Eric just held you, or simply spent time kissing and touching you? Sweetheart, when was the last time he gently made love to you?" She sat there in a daze, looking questioningly at Kit. "What?" With a determined sigh, Kit looked at her friend for a moment before going on. "Kathy," she asked bluntly, "was he making love to you, or just enjoying you?" Kathy's buried her face in her hands and sobbed deeply. "But why? Why would he do that?" She wondered, then suddenly froze. No, he couldn't know, could he? Slowly raising her head, she had a look of horror on her face. "Oh God, Kit," she whispered, "he knows. Oh God, please no. Please no." Tears began to fill Kit's eyes as she held her weeping friend. She knew Eric pretty well, and if he really did know, then this would get ugly. Eric nodded as he listened on his cell. "Thank you, sir," he finally said upon hearing his wife had been served and that the packages containing the pictures and legal documents had been delivered. Hanging up, he turned his attention to his laptop. With a simple click, he started the process that would change his unfaithful wife's life forever. One she'll remember for the rest of her life, he thought to himself as he picked up his cell phone and dialed. "Hello, this is HR," said a sweet young voice. "How may I help you?" "Mr. Davis, please," Eric said coolly. "This is Eric Brown." "Oh, Mr. Brown," the girl said quickly. "Let me transfer you." A few seconds later, Eric was speaking to a man who most had never seen smile. The conversation was brief. Neither man raised his voice, but the hostility was not missed by either of them. As Eric ended the call, he let out a deep sigh. Looking at his phone, he saw in the call log that his wife had already called him 5 times. Not yet, he thought, trying to steady himself. Not yet. There was a brisk knock on the conference room door. As Kit opened it, she immediately recognized the 3 individuals standing in front of her. The first was a well-dressed elderly man named Simon Samuels, the vice president and head of their branch. Behind him stood the imposing presence of John Davis, director of human resources. Kit couldn't miss the fact that Mr. Davis's face was bright red, and she swore that she could see heat coming off his face. Behind the two of them stood Anna Prescott, office manager and Kit and Kathy's supervisor. "Ms. Garnett, we need to speak with Ms. Brown," Mr. Samuels said, his face grim. "Thank you for your assistance, but please return to your desk." The 3 walked into the room, and Kit left behind them, gently closing the door. "Ms. Brown, we have a problem," Mr. Samuels began. Kathy walked quickly out into the parking lot, trying not to stumble. She held tightly to the manila envelope that Mr. Davis had given her. Inside were horrible pictures of her and Sean Thompson, a business manager from the 3rd floor. Mr. Davis had briefly recapped his discussion with Eric. Eric was threatening to make public the fact that the company had not enforced their code of conduct policy. He told Mr. Davis that he'd discuss it with his future ex-wife at home before he decided on whether to pursue any possible legal actions. Mr. Davis informed her that they would be meeting with Sean next, but that she should get herself home and talk with her husband before this all gets out of hand. He had also informed her that they would all sit down with her and discuss her future with the company tomorrow after she had met with her husband. Kathy had a difficult time finding her car because she was still crying so hard. The bright sunlight glared off of the cars, making them a little more difficult to identify. However, her car should not have been that hard to find. The big black SUV was not easily hidden. Kathy crawled into it, remembering the fights that had led up to Eric finally agreeing to lease the car for her. He conceded just before he'd left for Afghanistan. She wiped her eyes, put on her sunglasses, and took off for home. A man in an old Chevy sedan parked close by picked up his cell. "Thanks, Bob," Eric said calmly. No, that's all. Please tell Ron that you guys did a great job and deserve the bonus. Thanks again. Goodbye." Looking down at his laptop, Eric sighed again. Just one more call, he thought to himself. Just one more, and there would be no turning back. But why would he even want to go back? All that was left was an unfaithful wife that tore his heart out and a shattered marriage that he would never be able to put back together again. Eric shook his head and took out a prepaid cell phone. This last call needed to be untraceable. He dialed quickly, then waited. First ring, second ring, third ring, a soft click, and then silence. Eric sat, emotionless, as he stared at the video feed on his laptop. Finally, after several minutes, a tear ran down his cheek. Kathy pulled the big SUV out onto the interstate and groaned. She had hoped she would be able to avoid the rush hour traffic. She hadn't. She pounded on the steering wheel. At this rate, she knew that her usual 30-minute commute would take over an hour. She thought about her marriage, about how unlikely she would be able to salvage any of it. Eric had found out about her affair. Before Iraq, he might have been able to forgive her, but not now. The pictures had been taken while he was away in Afghanistan. She sobbed, realizing what he must think. Even though the chances were remote, she had to try to save it, simply because she still loved him. A funny way of showing it, though, huh? She chided herself. Cheating on him not once, but both times he had gone overseas to serve his country. She shook her head quickly, as if trying to push back the guilt and shame, but the tears began flowing again. Trust was not something that came easily to Eric. His childhood had been a hard one. His father had run out on him and his mother when he was little, and his mother was an alcoholic. In the 5 years they'd been married, Kathy had only seen his mother twice. Once at their wedding and once when their son was born. It had taken him years to trust Kathy. When they had met in college, she'd known he was a soldier. She thought she had accepted that. He'd already served 2 active years and was well on the way to receiving his engineering degree. They had dated a year before Eric asked her to marry him. She could still hear her father's reaction. "No, Kathy, this has nothing to do with Eric," her father had said. "I think he'll make a great husband. It's more about you. I don't know that you'll make a good military wife. Now don't get mad, honey, but it's damn hard to be a good husband or wife when your spouse leaves for a year." Mike Lomax, Kathy's father, had served in the Navy for 4 years when Kathy was little. She still remembered the fights her parents had gotten into during that time. She'd always known that he and her mom had had a rough time of it and that he didn't want that for his little girl. "You were right, Daddy," Kathy sniffed as she shook her head. "You were so right. I made a terrible soldier's wife." They had bought a very nice starter home and Eric had settled into a nice engineering position. Life looked so very promising, and then Uncle Sam called. When he got the news of his deployment, she had berated him mercilessly about him abandoning her. To make things more difficult, when Eric left for Iraq, she was already 4 months pregnant. Kathy wiped her eyes as she crept through traffic. She remembered the loneliness she'd felt as she went on with life without Eric there. Sure, her mom and dad had done their best to help, but the sleepless nights alone had eaten at her. She had needed Eric to hold her during that time, to hear his voice whispering it would be all right. But he wasn't there. She knew that she was being selfish, that being gone while she was pregnant had torn him apart also. But that hadn't made the nights less cold and lonely. Her mother had moved in the last month before the baby was born, and that had helped some. Kathy and her mom, Lisa, had a very close relationship in most areas. Their personalities were so very close that it seemed more like they were best friends rather than mother and daughter. But there were some things that her mom just wouldn't talk about. The details about her marriage during the time her dad was in the Navy were one of them. When Kathy would try to push the subject, her mother would always become very upset. Eric got to come home on RN or the day after Randy was born. For a brief moment, it was like we were a real family, Kathy thought, but it didn't last. He left just 10 days later, and she was alone again. Her mother had seen some of the signs and had begged her not to give in to them. She continuously harped on the damage just one mistake could do to so many people's lives. Of course, she wouldn't go into any detail, but Kathy suspected that her father may have had an affair. They were always pleasant and polite to each other, even friendly, but never passionate. It was more like they were friends living in the same house. Kathy remembered how she had fought the depression and loneliness for months after the birth. Going back to work helped at first. Then she was assigned to a project with Sean Thompson. Where Eric had rugged, boy-next-door good looks, Sean could have been a male model. His smooth baritone voice and beautiful smile had made Kathy's heart skip a beat whenever he'd enter the room. He carried himself with such confidence and had such an impressive air about him. She knew he was married to an attractive, wealthy socialite from New York. They and their children had just moved to the area a couple of years earlier. She had even met his wife once at a company party. She was beautiful in a cosmetically enhanced way, and her personality was perfectly suited for one of those housewife reality TV shows. But it just made Sean that much more exciting. Just a month after they had begun working together, she wilted under the temptation. Wilted? She grimaced. That's bullshit. I was the one flirting with him. A short 2-day business trip with the project team had provided the opportunity to turn that flirting into a full-blown affair. They met several more times, but she ended it shortly before Eric came home. Eric returned changed. The carefree, country boy part of him seemed to have died. She knew his tour had been difficult and that he'd lost some close friends while he was over there. She even remembered the call from him a day after the worst had happened. The Humvee in front of him had hit an IED, killing 3 of his friends and maiming another one. Eric had taken it hard. Kathy remembered just letting him cry on the phone because there was so little she could say that could comfort him. She even got choked up telling him how much she loved and missed him, mostly because she truly meant it, but partially because of her shame from being with Sean just 5 days earlier. She had spent the first several months after his return just holding Eric, trying to nurture him back into the man he had been before he'd left. There was no doubt in her mind that she loved him, and her affair with Sean was just a season of weakness. Then, just when things seemed to be going so well again, his deployment orders to Afghanistan came through. She was crushed. Not surprisingly, 2 months after he left, she found herself back in Sean's arms. She knew there was no excuse for it, but in the end her guilt was trumped by her loneliness and fear. She had pursued Sean again, and it had taken all of her charms to get him away from that succubus in marketing that he had started up with after their affair ended. She felt her face flush with the shame of what she had done. Of course you're ashamed, but it didn't stop you, did it? Kathy scolded herself. She tried to fight back the tears but failed, feeling her self-loathing pouring out with each one. Sean had spent several weekends staying at her house. He had even managed to get her on another project with him. For a moment, Kathy had even considered leaving Eric. Then reality set in. She, Randy, and her parents had gone to Fort Bragg, North Carolina to meet Eric when he came back for R&R. The trip there was tense, to say the least. Kathy was sure her parents suspected the affair, but they hadn't confronted her about it yet. Then she saw Eric and every care fell away. When he held her and kissed her, she remembered why she had married him in the first place. They spent every hour rekindling their marriage and strengthening their family. Kathy smiled weakly when she thought of that time. Eric had been so passionate, so tender, so incredibly loving, she had sworn to herself at that moment that she would remain faithful to him for the rest of her life. Then Eric had told her he wasn't going to re-enlist, that within 4 months after he returned from Afghanistan, he would be a civilian. She had wept openly knowing they were soon going to be a real family again. After she had returned from Fort Bragg, she broke off all relations with Sean, much to his frustration and anger. She poured everything she had into preparing for Eric's return. Kathy had even started seeing a doctor about her fears and loneliness. She was diagnosed as clinically depressed and had begun counseling and medication. As the months went by, she felt herself getting stronger both mentally and emotionally. She swore each day that she was going to make up for all of this by being the best wife Eric could have ever hoped for. Finally, when he returned several months later, she had made good on her vows. She had denied him nothing, not her body, her attention, nor any part of her love. Kit was right, though. Things had been different when Eric had returned home this time. He was more guarded and didn't share his heart as freely. She had just thought it was because of the things that had happened when he was overseas. Now she began to realize he had already known about her affair, and that thought terrified her. Solemnly, Eric stared out the window watching the gentle rain fall on those unfortunate enough to be caught in it. He could tell that the little cloudburst wouldn't last very long. Soon the sun would be shining again. Not soon enough, Eric thought to himself. No, not nearly soon enough. He watched the little dot on the laptop screen. It had been stationary for a while but was now finally moving. His wife's SUV was still caught in traffic but was now making progress. With a deep sigh, he looked at his watch. It was time to make the call. Depending on what was said, this could be the last time he spoke with the woman he had deeply loved for the last 6 years of his life. Kathy almost jerked the steering wheel when her cell phone rang. A quick look told her it was him. She said a short prayer, took a deep breath, and answered. Eric. Yeah, it's me, he replied. Baby, please, she said as she tried to stifle sob. Please let me try to explain, to tell you how sorry I am. Baby. Eric. There was only silence. Sweetheart, she said, are you still there? Yeah, for the moment, he replied curtly. Honey, where are you? Are you at home with Randy? I don't have a home, Kathy, he said. his voice betraying his pain for only a second. You took care of that. Where are you? It doesn't matter. I'm just waiting. For me. Her voice was hopeful. Like you waited for me, honey? Kathy couldn't contain the sob as it caught in her throat. She had never heard so much pain and anger in his voice before, and certainly never directed at her. Eric, please. There's so much to say. I've screwed up so badly, I know I have. But I need to talk to you. There is so much I need to say to you. I love you, baby. Only you. There was only silence on the other end of the line. Then he spoke. All right, Kathy, say what you need to, but I doubt it's going to change anything. You've been sleeping with some other guy while I've been away. Not once, but many times. So just what the hell do you think you can say that will make any difference? Please, Eric. Please, for our sake. She begged through her tears. Don't give up on us before I see you. Please, baby. Don't give up, he hissed, like you did on us. No. She screamed over the phone. I know what I did doesn't look like it, but I never gave up on us. I was alone and scared. I know it's no excuse, but I was. But I still love you, and I believe in us, baby. I really do. Are you serious? He said, surprised. Eric paused for a moment, wondering if she actually believed what she was spewing. Are you saying you didn't give up on us when you were sucking his tool? How about when you were screaming his name as he banged you again and again? Tell me how the hell you could even begin to think that wasn't giving up on us. All she could do was cry as she crawled through traffic, trying to get to him as quickly as she could. If she could just see him face to face, then he'd see the remorse she felt, and then there might be some hope. He continued bitterly. I finally got the proof my wife was cheating on me while I was in Afghanistan. Lucky for both of us, I guess. I think I might have killed you and that a-hole if I'd found out while I was stateside. After a few seconds, he sighed. Kathy, this will be our last conversation. If we get disconnected or either one of us gets put on hold, then there won't be another one. Eric, please, she pleaded. We can go to counseling. We can get through this, baby. We really can. He continued. Listen, there are a few things you need to know before you get home. First, I've cleaned out all of our accounts and maxed out all the credit cards. I figure you've screwed me over for the past 3 years, so I'm returning the favor. He ignored her gasp. You can keep the house since I'm sure I can still smell him in our bed. I packed up the things I wanted. It ended up only fitting in a single suitcase, so the rest is yours. You can keep your SUV, though I'm not sure how you'll pay for it since I'd suspect you'll be fired tomorrow. I've sent those pictures to all of your coworkers, family, all of our friends, and even our church. Plus, I've submitted them and a bunch of video to several spicy sites, along with all your information. I'd suspect that you'll be very popular soon. Oh, Eric, no, Kathy sobbed. Why? Why wouldn't you wait until we had talked? I did wait, Kathy, he said calmly. I waited 4 months after I got back, but you said nothing, and wouldn't have said anything if you hadn't had been caught. Isn't that right, baby? What could she say? He was right. As for your little boy toy, Eric sneered, I almost paid him a little visit. But after meeting with his wife a few times, I don't think that it will be necessary. That is one vindictive witch. You might want to give Sean a little heads up. He'd better run. Seems his wife's family has some interesting connections with some very shady people. It wouldn't surprise me if little Sean doesn't get through the year without having an accident. She'll probably come after his little 304s, too. Oh wait, that would include you too, wouldn't it? Eric, please, give me the chance to make this up to you, please? Kathy's cell phone beeped. Looking at it, she recognized the number. Eric? It's Mrs. Johnson from next door calling. I told you, if you disconnect, we're done. His tone was threatening. Startled, Kathy replied softly, Okay, baby. I was just concerned that maybe something had happened to Randy. Randy's fine, Eric's voice softened. He's with me right now, and he's sound asleep. She sighed in relief and let the call go to her voicemail. Speaking of Sean's wife, Victoria, he said calmly, while you two went out on your little business trip last week. He was interrupted by Kathy's cell phone buzzing again. It was another neighbor calling. Sweetheart, it's Mrs. Wilcox. Are you sure Randy's okay? Yes, both Randy and I are perfectly all right, Eric said with an eerie tone that made Kathy begin to panic. He chuckled. Now, about Victoria Thompson. She's quite something. While you and that a-hole were finally acting like you should have been for the past 3 years, I was spending 2 days getting to know his wife, intimately. Kathy gasped as she felt both the anger and hurt from hearing of her husband's betrayal. Her tears began to flow again. I'd like to tell you she's a hell of a lot better in bed than you were, but the truth is that she isn't, he stated. Between her whining and her bitching about everything she wants and where and when to do it, hell, that just took the fun out of it. I'm sure Sean would agree. So congratulations, Kathy. You've won the Best Sex with a 304 award. Eric, stop it. Please. Kathy begged. Please, just stop. She began sobbing again. She slammed her small fist against the steering wheel, screaming profanities at the surrounding cars as they crept forward. Slowly, she regained her composure as she wiped away the tears of frustration. All right, Eric, she sniffled. You win. You've got your revenge. You've broken me. She paused, waiting for him to respond, but only heard silence. But I still love you, Eric, she said softly. There's no excuse for what I did. I know that. But all I'm asking is the chance to make it up to you. I'm begging you, please. Please let me explain myself. There are some medical issues you should know about. If you ever loved me, please meet with me. Please, baby. Medical reasons? He snorted. Postpartum depression? Clinical depression? Bipolarism? Hell, try post-traumatic disorder. In the end, it doesn't really matter, does it, Kathy? You still went and had sex with some other guy. How did I find out? It really doesn't matter. Once I did, I hired some people to watch you. They did one hell of a job too. They tapped phones and planted cameras all over our house, even put one in our bedroom. Oh, Eric, she cried. Do you really hate me so much that you could do all of this? Isn't there even the tiniest bit of love left? Well, there was, he replied quietly, before I watched that video of you and him in our bed. Do you remember that time, Kathy? The time that Randy walked in on the two of you? Kathy gasped. Oh God, no. Please, not that. Eric's voice was strained as he fought to control his emotions. Image how I felt as I sat there and watched as my 2-year-old son called another man Dada. Anything I felt for you died right then as I watched you lift our son into bed with the both of you. Damn you. Which? Eric's voice cracked. I guess I was lucky that I didn't see that until after we had spent time at Fort Bragg. When I saw that, I was shattered. I almost lost it over there, and that's a place you can't afford to lose it. Eric looked down at his laptop and saw that Kathy was still driving. It's time, Kathy. I have to leave for a place where you can never find us. Where are you? Why us? Where is Randy? She screamed. You need to hurry, Kathy. You need to hurry. Don't leave, Eric. I am coming. Kathy never reached home. A video camera on the highway found her driving while talking on the phone. The car was crushed, and no one tried to check for the brake oil leakage. Eric was paid hush money by Kathy's former employee. Eric got married 2 years later with Samantha. She was a widow of a fellow brother who lost his life in Afghanistan. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.